Don't skip this story. Every word matters, every moment connects to the next, and by the end, you'll feel something you may not have felt in a long time. This is a tale about judgment, resilience, and the unexpected strength that even the smallest creature can show. Stay with me until the end, you won't regret it. It all started on a hot, endless stretch of highway. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the asphalt and making the air shimmer. On the side of the road sat a small, scruffy dog. His fur was matted with dirt, and his ribs were visible beneath his thin coat. He looked like he belonged nowhere and to no one, a forgotten soul in a world that seemed to have no place for him. He wasn't begging for food. He wasn't even moving. He simply sat there, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, as though he were waiting for something or someone. And then came the roar of engines. A group of bikers sped down the highway, loud, carefree, and full of energy. They laughed and shouted, their bikes gleaming under the blazing sun. As they passed the dog, one of them noticed him and slowed down. "Hey, look at this guy," the biker shouted to his friends, pointing to the stray. The others turned around, circling back to where the dog sat. They parked their bikes nearby, towering over the little creature. Some laughed, others made mocking comments. "Hey, mutt, waiting for a ride," one of them joked. "Looks like he's seen better days," another sneered, tossing a rock near the dog's feet to see if it would scare him off. But the dog didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't bark, didn't growl. He just sat there, staring at the road as though they weren't even there. His calm, unwavering presence was unnerving in its own way. "Maybe he's broken," one biker laughed, revving his engine as if to scare him. But the dog remained still, his gaze steady, almost defiant. After a while, the bikers grew bored and sped off, leaving the stray behind in a cloud of dust. They didn't think twice about him. He was just another stray dog, just another insignificant creature on the side of the road. But they didn't know what was coming. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The dog remained where he was, still staring at the road. He seemed to be waiting for something far more important than food or water. As night fell, the bikers, now several miles down the highway, pulled over at a diner for a late meal. They laughed and joked about their ride, the stray dog just a fleeting memory in their conversation. But as they sat there, something strange happened. A waitress approached their table, her expression serious. "Hey," she said, pointing to the window. "Do you guys own a dog?" The bikers exchanged confused glances. "What?" No one of them replied. "Well, there's a dog sitting by your bikes," the waitress said. "He looks like he followed you here." The bikers got up and went outside, and sure enough, there he was. The same scruffy dog from the side of the road, sitting quietly next to their bikes. He wasn't begging or barking, just sitting, his eyes fixed on them with an intensity that was hard to ignore. "Is this some kind of joke?" one biker muttered, looking around as if expecting someone to pop out with a camera. But it wasn't a joke. The dog had followed them. At first, the bikers tried to shoo him away. They waved their arms, shouted, even threw small stones at him, but the dog didn't budge. He just sat there, unyielding, as though he had decided that they were now a part of his story. "He's got guts." "I'll give him that," one biker said, shaking his head. "Maybe he wants food," another suggested, tossing a piece of his sandwich toward the dog. But the dog didn't even look at it. Food wasn't what he was after. Something about the dog's presence unsettled them. He wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't submissive either. He was just there, watching, waiting. Finally, one of the bikers, a man named Jake, knelt down in front of the dog. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice softer now. The dog tilted his head slightly, his eyes meeting Jake's. There was something in those eyes, something that Jake couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was something deeper. That night, the bikers decided to let the dog stay near their campsite. They figured he would lose interest and wander off by morning. But when they woke up, he was still there, sitting quietly near the bikes. As the group prepared to leave, Jake felt a strange pull. He couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was trying to tell them something. Against his better judgment, he decided to take the dog along. "Are you serious?" one of the others asked. "Yeah," Jake said. "I don't know why, but I think we're supposed to help him." The others laughed. but Jake didn't care. He secured the dog in a makeshift carrier on his bike, and the group continued their journey, the stray now an unlikely passenger. Over the next few days, the dog became part of their rides. He stayed quiet, never causing trouble, but his presence began to change something in the group. They started treating him like one of their own, even giving him a name, Shadow, for the way he always stayed close to them. But Shadow wasn't just a passenger. He began to guide them in subtle ways, refusing to move when they tried to take certain roads, barking when something seemed off. It was as though he had a purpose, a mission that they were unknowingly helping him fulfill. One evening, as they rode through a remote area, Shadow began barking frantically. Jake stopped the group, trying to calm him down, but Shadow jumped off the bike and started running toward the woods, looking back as if urging them to follow. "What's he doing?" one of the bikers asked. "I don't know," Jake said, "but we should find out." They followed Shadow into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. After several minutes, they heard a faint, desperate cry for help. They ran toward the sound and found a man trapped under a fallen tree. He was injured, dehydrated, and barely conscious. Without Shadow, they never would have found him. The bikers worked together to free the man and carried him back to the road, where they called for help. The man, who had been missing for days, later told them that he had prayed for a miracle, and that miracle had arrived in the form of a stray dog. The bikers were never the same after that. Shadow had taught them something they hadn't realized. They needed to learn the power of compassion, the value of listening, and the idea that even the smallest, most unassuming creatures could have the biggest impact. Shadow stayed with Jake, becoming his loyal companion and a constant reminder that sometimes the things we dismiss or mock are the very things that hold the most meaning. And so, the stray dog who had once been mocked by bikers became their hero, leaving a legacy of love, courage, and the undeniable truth that even the most unlikely beings can change lives. Never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness or the unwavering spirit of a dog like Shadow. As the days turned into weeks, Shadow's presence began to transform the entire group of bikers. What started as a reluctant act of kindness turned into something far deeper, an unspoken bond that none of them could explain. Shadow wasn't just a stray anymore, he was family. Jake, who had always prided himself on being tough and indifferent, found himself changing in ways he hadn't thought possible. He started noticing things he used to overlook: the way Shadow's ears perked up at the sound of birds, the way he instinctively comforted anyone who seemed upset, and the quiet strength in his gaze that seemed to say, "I've been through worse, and I'm still here." One night, as the group camped by a quiet river, Jake sat alone with Shadow by the fire. The others had gone to bed, leaving the two in the glow of the flickering flames. Jake absent-mindedly scratched behind Shadow's ears and spoke softly, as if the dog could understand every word. "You know," Jake began, his voice tinged with vulnerability, "I didn't think I needed anyone. Not people, not a dog, not anyone. Life's easier when you don't let anyone in. No expectations, no disappointments." Shadow tilted his head, his eyes locked on Jake, as if urging him to continue. "But you've got this way of making me feel like maybe there's more to life than just riding and moving on. Like maybe sticking around, caring about someone it's not so bad." Jake's voice cracked slightly, and he quickly cleared his throat. "Don't go getting a big head now," he joked, but there was no mistaking the emotion behind his words. Shadow rested his head on Jake's knee, his quiet presence saying more than words ever could. The group's adventures with Shadow took them to places they never thought they'd go, not just physically, but emotionally. They started volunteering at animal shelters, inspired by Shadow's story. They would ride into towns, share their journey, and raise awareness about the importance of compassion for animals. People began recognizing them, not as a rough group of bikers, but as men who had found a purpose beyond themselves. They were welcomed into communities with open arms, and their reputation shifted from intimidating to inspiring. Shadow became the heart of their mission. Everywhere they went, people were drawn to him: children, elders, even those who claimed not to like dogs. There was something about him, a quiet wisdom that seemed to heal the broken parts of everyone he met. But Shadow's greatest test, and the bikers, was yet to come. One rainy afternoon, as the group rode through a remote area, Shadow began acting strangely. He barked incessantly, tugging at Jake's sleeve and refusing to let them continue down the road. "What's wrong?" Boy Jake asked, trying to calm him down. Shadow ran toward the edge of the road and stopped, barking and looking back at them. The group hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow him. The rain poured down in sheets as they trudged through the muddy path Shadow led them on. After a few minutes, they heard a faint, pitiful whimper coming from the woods. They quickened their pace, their hearts racing as they followed Shadow deeper into the forest. And then they saw it. A mother dog lay in a shallow ditch, soaked to the bone and shivering. Beside her were 4 tiny puppies, huddled together for warmth. The sight was heartbreaking. She had clearly been abandoned, left to fend for herself and her babies in the pouring rain. The bikers sprang into action, using their jackets to shield the dogs from the rain. They carefully carried the mother and her pups back to their bikes, where they used whatever supplies they had to make them as comfortable as possible. Shadow stayed close to the mother dog, nuzzling her gently as if to reassure her that she was safe now. The bikers knew they couldn't leave the dogs behind, so they changed their plans and headed to the nearest town, where they found a small veterinary clinic. The vet, an older woman with a kind smile, took the dogs in and promised to care for them. "They'll be okay," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You brought them here just in time." The group let out a collective sigh of relief. Shadow, sitting beside Jake, wagged his tail as if he understood the gravity of what they had done. The experience left a profound impact on the bikers. They had saved lives, not just human lives, but lives that mattered just as much. Shadow had shown them the way, and in doing so, he had solidified his place as their leader in more ways than one. Word of their rescue spread, and soon the group was being hailed as heroes. People reached out to thank them, to share their own stories of animals who had changed their lives, and to offer support for their newfound mission. What started as a chance encounter with a scruffy stray had turned into a movement. Years passed, and the bikers, once a group of rough, misunderstood men, became known as advocates for animals and compassion. They continued to ride, but their journeys were no longer aimless. They rode with purpose, carrying Shadow's spirit and the lessons he taught them wherever they went. Jake often thought about that first moment when they met Shadow on the side of the highway. He used to believe it was just coincidence, but now he knew better. Shadow had chosen them for a reason, and in doing so he had changed their lives forever. Shadow lived a long, happy life surrounded by love and adventure. When his time eventually came, the group held a memorial for him, a celebration of the dog who had taught them what it truly meant to live with purpose and heart. They built a small monument for Shadow at the edge of the highway where they first found him, inscribed with the words, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some walk on 4 legs and teach us to be better." And so Shadow's legacy lived on, not just in the bikers who loved him, but in everyone who heard his story and chose to be a little kinder, a little braver, and a little more like him. Shadow's memory became a guiding light for the bikers, a beacon that reminded them of the journey they had undertaken together. The monument by the highway stood not just as a tribute to Shadow, but as a reminder to anyone passing by that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple into something extraordinary. The bikers continued their mission, but their rides were no longer solitary adventures. Communities started reaching out to them, inviting them to share Shadow's story. Schools, shelters, and even biker rallies began hosting them to talk about the power of compassion and the importance of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Each time they told Shadow's story, Jake felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't just about a dog. It was about how Shadow had broken through their walls, taught them to see the world differently, and reminded them that no life was too small or insignificant. One day, while riding through a familiar stretch of road, the group passed the monument they had built for Shadow. Jake pulled over, the others following suit. The sky was overcast, and the wind whispered through the tall grass along the highway. Jake knelt in front of the monument, tracing the words they had engraved. "Hey, old boy," he said softly. "We're still out here, doing what you taught us. It's not the same without you, but we're trying to make you proud." The others stood silently, their heads bowed in respect. For a moment, it was as if Shadow was there with them, his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty still a part of their lives. Not long after, the bikers encountered another stray dog during one of their rides, a small, timid puppy hiding under an abandoned car. It was clear the pup was scared and unsure, but when Jake knelt down and held out his hand, the little dog slowly came forward. The moment felt like déjà vu. The bikers couldn't help but smile as they welcomed the new addition to their group. "Looks like Shadow sent us another one," one of them said with a grin. They named the pup Hope, a nod to the lessons Shadow had taught them. Hope quickly became a part of their rides, just as Shadow had. She was smaller, younger, and had a different energy, but she brought the same sense of purpose and unity to the group. As the years passed, the bikers' mission grew. They started a foundation in Shadow's name, dedicated to rescuing animals and supporting shelters across the country. Their rides became fundraisers, their stories inspiring others to take action. What had started as a chance encounter with a scruffy stray had become a legacy that spanned miles and hearts. Jake often thought about how far they had come. He had once been a man who kept the world at arm's length, but now he was part of something bigger than himself, something that Shadow had started with nothing more than his quiet determination and unshakable spirit. One evening, as the group gathered around a campfire, Jake looked at his friends, at Hope curled up by his feet, and at the stars above. "You know," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I used to think we were the ones who saved Shadow. But now I know the truth. He saved us." The others nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the same mix of gratitude and awe. And in that moment, under the vast expanse of the night sky, they knew that Shadow's story would never truly end. It lived on in their hearts, in the lives they touched, and in every road they traveled together. Shadow had shown them the way, and they would carry his legacy forward 1 mile, 1 life, and 1 act of kindness at a time. The fire crackled softly as Jake's words hung in the air, weaving their way into the hearts of everyone gathered around. The bikers sat in contemplative silence, each of them reflecting on how much their lives had changed since Shadow had come into their world. Hope, the young pup who had joined their group not so long ago, lifted her head from where she lay by Jake's feet. She gazed at him with the same trust and loyalty Shadow had once shown. It was as if she understood the weight of the moment, the significance of the story she was now a part of. Jake reached down to scratch behind her ears, his rough hand gentle against her soft fur. "You've got big shoes to fill, kid," he said with a small smile. "But something tells me you'll do just fine." The others chuckled quietly, and one of them added, "She's already a natural. Shadow would have liked her." As the night deepened, the bikers began sharing their favorite memories of Shadow. Stories of his bravery, his quirks, and the countless ways he had changed their lives poured out like a river. They laughed, they wiped away tears, and they celebrated the life of the dog who had brought them together in ways they never imagined. "I remember that time he stopped us on the highway," one of the bikers said, his voice filled with awe. "If it weren't for him, those pups and their mum would have been lost. He had this instinct, like he knew where he was needed." Another nodded. "He taught us to see what we'd been blind to all our lives. To stop, to care, to act. How does a dog teach men something so profound?" Jake leaned forward, his gaze steady as he answered. "Because he wasn't just a dog, he was a teacher. A guide. He came into our lives for a reason, and he made us better for it." The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the group as they continued to talk late into the night. They spoke not only of Shadow but of the countless animals they had helped since starting their mission. Each rescue, each life saved, felt like another way to honor Shadow's legacy. Hope listened quietly, her ears twitching at the sound of their voices. She may not have understood the words, but she understood the love and respect that filled the air. As dawn began to break, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Jake stood and stretched. He looked around at his friends, at Hope, and at the open road that awaited them. "It's a new day," he said, his voice resolute. "Let's make it count." The others nodded, their spirits renewed. They packed up their camp, their movements purposeful and efficient. Hope trotted alongside them, her tail wagging as if she knew another adventure awaited. The group rode out together, their bikes roaring to life and breaking the stillness of the morning. Hope rode with Jake, her small frame perched securely on the seat in front of him. She seemed to love the wind in her face, her ears flapping as they sped down the highway. As they passed the monument to Shadow, Jake slowed down and glanced at it. He didn't stop this time, he didn't need to. He carried Shadow's memory with him wherever he went, and he knew the others did too. The open road stretched before them, endless and full of possibilities. They didn't know where their journey would take them next, but they knew one thing for certain: they would continue to honor Shadow's legacy with every mile they traveled, every life they touched, and every act of kindness they performed. And so, The bikers rode on, their hearts full of purpose and their spirits guided by the lessons of a stray dog who had shown them the true meaning of compassion. Shadow's story didn't end, it lived on, not just in their lives, but in every soul they inspired along the way. It was a story of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between man and dog. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're the ones who find us when we need them most and teach us to see the world through kinder eyes. Shadow was one of those heroes, and his legacy would never fade. The bikers' journey continued, but something about the road ahead felt different. It wasn't just the miles they traveled or the places they visited, it was the people they met and the lives they touched along the way. Shadow's story had become a bridge, connecting them to others in ways they never thought possible. One day, as they rode through a small town nestled in the valley, they stopped at a local diner for a break. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon, and the chatter of locals created a warm hum in the background. Jake and the others took their usual corner table, with Hope sitting loyally by Jake's side. Her presence immediately caught the attention of a little boy sitting with his mother at a nearby table. The boy's eyes lit up as he watched Hope wag her tail and nuzzle Jake's hand. "Mom, can I go say hi to the dog?" the boy asked eagerly. His mother hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay, but be polite and ask first." The boy approached timidly, his small hands clasped together. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I pet your dog?" Jake smiled warmly. "Of course, buddy. Her name's Hope." The boy knelt down and gently stroked Hope's fur, his face lighting up with joy. "She's so soft," he said, giggling as Hope licked his hand. The mother watched from the table, her eyes misting over as she saw her son's happiness. After a moment, she approached Jake and the group, her expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "She's a beautiful dog," the woman said softly. "You've got a good one there." Jake nodded. "She's special, all right. Found her on the road not too long ago. She's been with us ever since." The woman hesitated before continuing. "You know, we lost our family dog a few months ago. My son has been heartbroken ever since. Seeing him smile like this, it's been a while. Thank you." Jake felt a lump in his throat. He glanced at his friends, who were equally moved by the woman's words. "Dogs have a way of healing us," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Hope's been doing that for us every day." As the group rode out of the town later that afternoon, the encounter stayed with them. It was a reminder of how much impact even a small moment of connection could have. Shadow had taught them that, and now Hope was carrying on his legacy in her own way. The road took them to a sprawling city where they decided to visit a large animal shelter that had reached out to them after hearing their story. The shelter's director, a passionate woman named Karen, welcomed them with open arms. "We've been following your journey," Karen said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Shadow's story has inspired so many people. And now, with Hope, you're continuing to show the world what compassion can do." The bikers spent the day at the shelter, meeting the animals and sharing their experiences. Jake found himself particularly drawn to an older dog named Max, who had been at the shelter for years. Max had graying fur and a limp, but his eyes sparkled with a quiet strength that reminded Jake of Shadow. "What's his story?" Jake asked Karen as he knelt beside Max's kennel. Karen sighed. "He was abandoned by his owner when he got too old to be useful. He's been here ever since. Most people want younger dogs, so he keeps getting overlooked." Jake felt a pang of anger and sadness. "Nobody should be left behind like that," he said, his voice firm. He stood and looked at his friends. "What do you say, guys? Think we've got room for one more?" The group exchanged smiles and nods. They knew Jake's mind was made up. By the time they left the shelter, Max was riding with them, his tail wagging as if he knew his life had just taken a turn for the better. Hope seemed to take to Max immediately, her youthful energy balancing his calm demeanor. The group now had 2 canine companions, each with their own story and their own way of healing the hearts around them. The bikers continued their mission with renewed purpose. They started organizing charity rides, partnering with shelters and rescue organizations to raise funds and awareness. Their story and shadows aired like wildfire, reaching people in every corner of the country. Strangers would approach them during their rides, sharing their own stories of love, loss, and redemption. Every encounter reminded them that Shadow's legacy was alive and thriving, carried forward not just by them but by everyone who had been touched by his story. Years later, Jake stood at the monument by the highway once again. The bikers had gathered for their annual ride in Shadow's honor, a tradition that had grown to include hundreds of riders from all walks of life. Hope and Max stood beside Jake, their presence a comforting reminder of how far they had come. Jake placed a hand on the monument and smiled. "You did good, buddy," he said softly. "You changed the world more than you'll ever know." The sound of engines roared in the distance as the riders began to gather. Jake turned to his friends, his heart full of gratitude and purpose. "Let's ride," he said. And with that, they set off, their journey continuing with every mile, every life they touched, and every story they shared. Shadow's legacy was no longer just a memory, it was a movement, a testament to the power of love, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and the animals who teach us to be better. The roar of the engines echoed across the open highway as the riders, now a family bound by a shared purpose, sped forward into the horizon. Shadow's legacy had grown into something far greater than any of them could have imagined. What had started with a stray dog and a group of bikers had become a symbol of hope and kindness, a movement that inspired people across the country. As the bikers traveled from town to town, they began seeing the ripple effects of their mission. Shelters that were once struggling now thrived with donations and volunteers. Stray animals found homes faster than ever before, thanks to the awareness campaigns the group had championed. Stories of compassion began emerging from places they had never been, proving that Shadow's story had reached far and wide. Jake often received letters and messages from people who had been inspired by their journey. Some spoke of adopting pets from shelters, others of starting their own rescue missions. One letter, in particular, stood out to Jake. It was from a young girl named Lily, who had convinced her parents to adopt a senior dog after hearing about Max. "I named him Shadow," the letter read, "because your story made me believe that every dog deserves love, no matter how old they are." Jake's eyes welled with tears as he read the words. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Shadow's name, his spirit, and his lessons would live on in every corner of the world they touched. Over the years, the group continued to grow. Riders from all over joined their cause, forming a vast network of individuals united by their love for animals and their desire to make a difference. The annual Shadow Ride became a national event, drawing thousands of bikers and supporters who rode together in memory of a dog who had changed lives. Hope and Max became icons in their own right, symbols of resilience and redemption. They rode with the group every step of the way, their presence a constant reminder of the mission they had embraced. Hope, with her boundless energy and youthful spirit, brought joy wherever she went, while Max's calm and wise demeanor inspired a sense of peace and determination. One particularly memorable day, the bikers stopped at a small town where they had been invited to speak at a local school. Jake stood before a group of wide-eyed children, Hope and Max sitting obediently by his side. He told them Shadow's story, his voice filled with emotion as he recounted how one stray dog had changed their lives forever. When he finished, a young boy raised his hand. "Do you think Shadow knew he was special?" the boy asked. Jake paused, his throat tightening. He smiled softly and said, "I don't think Shadow ever thought about himself that way. He just did what he knew was right. He didn't need to be special to make a difference, he just needed to care." The boy nodded thoughtfully, and Jake could see the seed of understanding take root in his young mind. That was the power of Shadow's story. It planted hope and compassion in every heart it touched. As the years turned into decades, the bikers grew older, their hair graying and their movements slowing. But their mission never wavered. Jake, now a grandfatherly figure with laugh lines and weathered hands, continued to lead the rides, his heart as steadfast as ever. Hope and Max lived long, happy lives, their years filled with love, adventure, and purpose. When their time came, the group mourned them deeply but celebrated the incredible legacy they had left behind. Just like Shadow, they had made the world a better place simply by being in it. New dogs joined the group over the years, each one finding a home among the bikers and becoming part of their ever-expanding family. Every dog carried with them the lessons Shadow had taught, lessons of love, loyalty, and the transformative power of kindness. One quiet evening, Jake sat alone by the fire, the distant hum of the highway in the background. He looked up at the stars, feeling a profound sense of peace. He thought about Shadow, about the journey they had taken together, and about the countless lives that had been touched along the way. "You're still with me, old boy," Jake whispered. Every mile, every heart we've reached, it's all because of you." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and for a moment, Jake could have sworn he felt Shadow's presence beside him. It was as if the dog's spirit, strong and unwavering, was reminding him that the journey wasn't over. There were still roads to travel, lives to touch, and stories to tell. With a contented sigh, Jake leaned back and closed his eyes. The fire crackled softly, its warmth wrapping around him like an old friend. Shadow's story had started with a simple act of compassion, but it had grown into a legacy that would never fade. And as long as there were open roads and open hearts, Shadow's spirit would continue to guide them, lighting the way for all who chose to follow.